Well, here we are on our long journey through the Grimm's folk tales. We have reached Hansel and Gretel. There was a time of great famine, and a poor woodcutter and his wife were no longer able to feed their children, for they had two children, a son named Hansel and a daughter named Gretel. And there came a time when the wife convinced the husband that the only possible thing to do was to take their children deep into the forest and leave them there. But Hansel overheard their conversation, and late at night he went out and found enough white pebbles to fill his pocket. So the next day, when the two children accompanied their parents deep into the forest, where their father was hard at work cutting wood, and of course the mother was there helping him with his work, Hansel left a trail of beautiful white pebbles, so that night the abandoned children were able to find their way back by the light of the moon. And their father was overjoyed to see his children, because he'd had many misgivings about leaving them in the forest. But their mother was angry. Time passed, and once again the family found themselves left with only one loaf of bread. And once again the mother managed to convince the father to take the children deep into the forest. And Hansel heard this, but this time the door was locked and he wasn't able to get out of the house, so he couldn't find any white pebbles. All that he could do the next day, when the children followed their parents deep into the wood, was to leave a trail of breadcrumbs. But when the moon rose that night, and the children tried to find their way back following the trail of breadcrumbs, they found that all the bread had been eaten by hungry birds. So the children wandered along unknown paths and found themselves facing the strangest cottage in the woods that they had ever seen. Well, there it was, a cottage made of food. The walls were made of bread, and the windows were made of sugar. And the children were so hungry that they forgot their manners and began to eat. And then out of the cottage hobbled an old woman with a crutch, who peered at them short-sightedly and sniffed like an animal does. And so she knew from their smell that they were children. And she invited them into her cottage, and she fed them a lovely meal with pancakes and sugar and apples and nuts. And that night they slept in two little beds. But the next morning they realised that the old woman was really a witch, because she locked Hansel in a pen in the garden and set Gretel to do all the work in the house. And over the next few weeks she tried to fatten Hansel up so that she could make him into a fine meal. But whenever the short-sighted old woman asked Hansel to put his finger through the bars of the pen, she felt an old bone and thought, but why isn't the boy getting any fatter? There's hardly any meat on him. And there came a day when the old woman was so hungry that she thought, today I will just eat him anyway. And her plan, of course, was to eat Gretel too. So she set Gretel to lighting the oven, to making a fire in the oven. And the old woman said to Gretel, climb inside the oven and see if the fire is hot. But Gretel said, I don't know. I don't know how to do that. The old woman sighed and said, oh, don't be such a stupid girl. Let me show you. So the old woman climbed inside the oven where the fire was lit, and Gretel slammed the door closed quickly so the old woman couldn't get out. And she ran out into the garden and opened the door of Hansel's pen and let him out. And so the two children were now free. But they found in the witch's cottage chests of gold and jewels, and so they filled their pockets with as much as they could carry. And they wandered for some time through the forest until they came to a river. And there on the river was a little white duck. And the little duck helped both Hansel and Gretel cross the river. And from there they managed to find their way back to their own parents' cottage. And their father greeted them at the door and wrapped his arms around them and hugged them so tight as if he would never let them go. And he was alone, for in the meantime their mother had died. So that left just the three of them, and pockets full of gold and jewels. So they were never hungry ever again. So that's a good story. It's an odd thing that of all the Grimm stories, that seems to be the most famous. And of course, you know, we're not really very comfortable with the whole sort of image of the image of the crone as a threatening, dark character, and we're certainly not very comfortable with cannibalism. But there's a really good video on YouTube with Bethany Hughes about the Minotaur and about the symbolism of the Minotaur, and great shots of Crete, by the way. Certainly inspired to go to Crete. It really does look like a beautiful place. But one of the things that comes out in the video is that archaeologists did actually find a cauldron with children's bones in it. There is historical and archaeological evidence of people eating children. Yeah, maybe because they felt that they would benefit from that sort of youthful life force. I'm sure anthropologists have written reams about all of this. But there you are. The other great theory, actually, about children being placed in an oven is if we can take the role of the witch as midwife. Terry Pratchett worked with this. That in very cold countries, this was how you kept newborn babies warm. You put them in the oven, like putting a baby in an incubator. So you can kind of take your choice out of those two images as to where the root of this story really comes from. There we are. Hansel and Gretel, and I think in later versions of that story, the the husband's wife was the stepmother. In the earlier versions, it is their own mother. Watching a YouTube video recently about the Black Death, actually, and about famine, and a historian was looking at the camera saying, and things were so desperate in 14th century England that parents abandoned their children. Yeah. Odd choice, actually. If you only have so much food, do you feed yourself or do you feed your children? There we are. Anyway, on that note, let's find some happier stories. Hope to see you again soon.